We generally assume human progress is a series of violent upgrades. A new system arrives, and the old one is discarded entirely. This flowchart maps how we view intellectual history. We tell ourselves that early societies invented myth, then they discarded myth for religion, and eventually they threw away religion for science. The continuity theory of human cognition suggests this sequence is backwards. There are no hard historical breaks. Previous levels of human thought are never deleted. They are simply reorganized. The underlying structures remain intact, while the language describing them becomes increasingly abstract. Trace this organizational lineage back to its origin, and a startling picture emerges. Modern empirical science and ancient mythology run on the exact same structural DNA. For early societies, mythological narratives were rigorous, necessary organizational tools. They functioned as humanity's first collective operating systems. They answered existential questions simultaneously. Why does the world exist? What is justice? Who has authority to govern? These stories acted as organizational attractors. They provided a shared model of reality that magnetically aligned collective behavior. By locking a population into a unified narrative, they stabilized highly stressed, chaotic groups of early humans. Before a society had the capacity to build physical institutions, narrative was the only technology capable of holding a civilization together. The literal origin of these narratives is not human imagination. It begins with raw physical data, specifically severe environmental strain. Look at this causal loop. Recurring environmental stressors like drought, invasion, and death force predictable collective emotional responses across an entire population. Over generations of repeated exposure, these chaotic emotional patterns crystallize into something permanent. They lock into a stable, symbolic narrative. Once stabilized, the narrative stops acting as a mere coping mechanism and begins regulating the society. A catastrophic flood becomes codified as a cosmic rule, transforming a random event into a demand for social obedience. A myth is therefore a highly functional, stabilized emotional model of environmental reality. As these societies scale, the myth is weaponized. It evolves from a grassroots survival tool into political architecture. Emerging kings, priests, and armies recognize the organizational power of these stories. They co-opt them to justify their supreme authority. The organizational center of the society shifts. It moves away from shared collective emotion and hardens into rigid, centralized institutions. In ancient Iran, this mechanism was explicit. The concept of kforena, or divine glory, was an institutionalized myth deployed specifically to legitimize kingship. This carving of the Faravar symbol is physical evidence of that shift. Political authority is explicitly linking itself to cosmic order, carving that narrative directly into state architecture. With institutions in place, the narrative functions as the architectural and legal basis for absolute obedience. Ancient Iran provides a perfect dataset to study the tension between centralized official history and decentralized political reality. When the Sasanian Empire came to power, they sought centralized political organization. To achieve this, they actively rewrote official history to erase decentralized power structures. The reality they were trying to overwrite was the Arsacid, or Parthian, confederation. The Parthian Empire was actually run by massive autonomous organizational units known as the Seven Great Houses, which included families like Suren and Karen. State documents may have erased their visibility, but collective memory did not. As seen in this manuscript of the Shahnameh, epic literature preserved the existence of these organizational units through heroic narratives. Official history asks, what happened? Myth asks a different question entirely. Who are we? In highly contested political environments, epic poetry often provides a more accurate record of true organizational architecture than the state archives. This explains a historical anomaly in the Persian epic tradition, the hero Rostam openly rebuking the absolute king. Why would an absolute monarchy's epic tradition ever allow its greatest literary hero to display open insubordination? The solution is that Rostam is not a historical individual. He is an organizational archetype encoding lost political data. This network map illustrates the decentralized nodes of the seven great houses in Parthian geography. Rostam represents their distributed military legitimacy. When we map the historical node of the House of Surin directly onto the mythological figure of Rostam, we see a precise organizational match. This proves the Parthian aristocratic houses genuinely possessed enough real-world authority to check the power of the central king. The mythological narrative preserved this exact political negotiation for centuries after the institutions themselves vanished. A myth acts as an incorruptible backup drive, saving a society's true power structure long after the physical civilization falls. As a civilization matures, it moves to the next stage of evolutionary complexity by abstracting these institutionalized myths. Philosophy steps in to extract pure, abstract principles from the traditional narratives. In Greek thinkers like Plato, we see the pivot where narrative answers provided by Olympian gods are replaced by logical reasoning and rational inquiry. Science performs an even further abstraction, pushing beyond philosophical meaning to ask exactly what physical mechanisms produce reality. While it removes the symbolic language entirely and relies on empirical observation, science maintains the overarching drive to provide a coherent explanatory framework for existence. Science operates as the mathematically precise descendant of ancient myth. We can apply this exact framework to modern political structures. Secular ideologies inherit these ancient organizational forms. Marxism, for example, is frequently presented as a purely scientific theory of history. Yet it operates using foundational texts, symbolic martyrs, and a utopian vision of the future, the exact organizational structures built by ancient religions. This entire cognitive process is governed by a unified principle, the law of organizational continuity of cultural systems. This diagram shows the complete stack, from primitive experience at the base, climbing all the way to technological implementation. As we move up, symbolic language decreases, while analytical representation increases. Because this law is tied to human cognition, geographically isolated civilizations develop remarkably similar organizational patterns. Ultimately, studying ancient epics provides a direct view into the original source code of our modern technological civilization.